Welcome to Watches with Dennis, and today I want to talk about the MoonSwatch. How could I not? How could I leave this one on the table? Unfortunately, I was out traveling when this news broke, but I'm late to the party, but getting to it finally because it's pretty interesting whether you love it or hate it. Now, for those that have been living under a rock and aren't familiar, what has happened is a collaboration between Omega and Swatch, which are both controlled by the Swatch Group. Think of that as the conglomerate that runs a number of watch companies, including Swatch and Omega. Got together and decided to make Swatch versions of the Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch, which is perhaps Omega's most famous watch. Now, as I often like to do, let's go ahead and get the specifications out of the way, and then we'll focus on the aesthetic details. So, all versions of this, and there are 11 different flavors of the MoonSwatch, come in a 42mm diameter. They have a thickness of 13.25 millimeters. They're all chronographs. They come in a variety of colors, which we'll touch on in a bit. They come on a Velcro strap. They are loomed. They have 30 meters of water resistance, and they're all driven by a quartz movement. The pricing on all of them is $260 US. They were made available on March 26, 2022, and they were only available at actual Swatch locations, not online. I'm not clear yet if they will be online eventually. I will assume they will be, though, given that they are all noted as not being limited. So what do I mean when I say that they took an Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch, but they made a Swatch version of it? Well, I think the first thing that people are going to note when they handle it is the material. It's not stainless steel like the Omega Speedmaster, but instead it's using something that Swatch is referring to as Bioceramic. From what I've read on Hodinkee, this material is essentially a 1/3 mix of plastic and 2/3 mix of ceramic. From what I have read of people who have handled these watches, because I have not been able to touch one yet, is it feels like plastic. So I don't know. I saw a little bit of a making of video that showed how they put it together, but regardless of the balance of ceramic and plastic, people say it's really lightweight and it feels like a plastic case, which is something that Swatch is known for. So it's a little bit different, though, I think, than what they've done on some of their other cases. I don't know if this is the first occurrence of bioceramic. I'm getting the impression it is, but I didn't research it further. Comment below if you know of any other instances where it might have been used, or how it may deviate from the other historic plastics that they've employed. I have one idea about how it deviates, and we'll get to that in a little bit. I'd say another Swatch feature is the strap. These have all been given a Velcro strap, which is definitely not something you see in luxury watches. The lug width on these watches is 20 millimeters, so alternative strap options will be readily available. So let's go ahead and walk through the 11 variations, which offer a variety of color palettes. So there is Mission to the Sun, which is essentially a gold-colored watch. Then there is Mission to Mercury, which is a very deep gray. It's not quite the Moonwatch, but I think this one looks pretty close. Then there's the Mission to Venus watch, which goes against all my knowledge of what Venus looks like and actually has gone with more the Roman goddess Venus and pulled a pink palette instead of something that the planet itself would actually look like. I also think the Mission to Venus one is interesting in that the subdials are more of an oval shape rather than round. Then there's Mission on Earth, which has gone with a mix of blue and green. Then there is Mission to the Moon, which is trying to follow everything as closely as possible to the original Omega Speedmaster Moonwatch. So for those that are looking for the low-cost substitute to the Omega, this is the obvious option to go with. Then there's Mission to Mars, which is probably the most creative one, if for no other reason than the two subdials seem to have little rocket ship pointers on them. But the overall look is very red and white, so fitting for the red planet. Then there's Mission to Jupiter. Mission to Jupiter has gone with sort of a bronze color aesthetic, with some of the hands being orange. Then there's Mission to Saturn, which reminds me a lot, actually, of the Jupiter one, except we've sort of shifted into beige. And you will see at the 6 o'clock position on this that there are the rings of Saturn represented. Then there's Mission to Uranus, which has gone with a light blue, coupled with a white bezel. There's Mission to Neptune, which is a dark blue with a matching bezel. And then there's Mission to Pluto, which is sort of a deep red along with gray. Swatch has indicated that an image of the heavenly body that the watch is representing is conveyed on the battery cover on the back of the watch. So what are my thoughts on these watches? I think they're fun. I definitely see why there's a lot of attraction to them. They look really good. They offer a very affordable price point to get into what's essentially easily identified as an Omega design. But the MoonSwatch is a cheap watch, and it's important to remember that in both senses of the term, the positive and the negative. For a lot of people, $260 for a watch is still pretty expensive. But if you're watching this channel, you're probably already at the point where $260 is a very small drop in the bucket compared to what you've probably paid for a number of other watches. In my experience, yes, $260 does seem a bit steep for a quartz watch, but it's been quite a while since I've bought quartz watches that weren't highly limited. But when it comes to the hobby of horology and wristwatches, I wouldn't mind throwing $260 and taking a chance on a watch, and I wouldn't be overly upset if it didn't meet everything I wanted it to meet. And I think going into this, you kind of have a good sense of what you're going to get. I mean, it is a fully functional chronograph. It does basically have a throwaway ETA movement, I believe a 4-jewel quartz movement, and I think I've seen a picture online where someone was showing what those look like, and you basically have access to the battery, and otherwise it's not really a movement that is designed to be serviced. Very much reminds me of sort of a quartz version of the old Timex watches, which were serviceable, but not really. However, there have already been some quality control complaints coming in about these watches. I'd say the smaller issue that I've seen has been the plastic crystal that they use, and that it is very easy to scratch. I don't know what sort of plastic they've used, but the speculation is this is not Omega's Hezolite crystal. This is a cheaper plastic. It's much easier to scratch. Yes, you can get out Polywatch and buff the scratches out, but just be aware that it's very prone to scratches from what I have seen reported so far. More notable and more concerning, I think, to a lot of people is there have been a number of complaints that have been cropping up about people's wrists being discolored by the color of whatever the case is that you've gotten. And I've seen video of someone doing a test online with one of the blue versions of this watch and showing that, yes, indeed, it does start to leave a color if it is exposed to moisture. Maybe this has to do with the use of the bioceramic and how the color is binding to it, and this isn't a problem that's historically cropped up on Swatch watches. Honestly, I've never looked into Swatch watches, so I have no idea if this is something that was prone to happen on some of their cheaper models, cheaper than this. But regardless, it is something that concerns people. I don't know if that color is going to leach away and leave a white case. That would be my number one concern, though. Granted, I don't exactly like my wrists turning colors, but if it's easy to wash off, I don't think it's the biggest deal. We need to remember this is not a $20 watch. It's a $260 watch. And I have a certain quality control standard that I would like to see out of that, and that would include not staining my skin. Now, another thing that has made no sense to me whatsoever was the sheer crowd sizes that turned out to get these watches. I mean, they are neat, but they are not limited. In fact, when the news broke about these watches and they went on sale, I was at a pinball event down in Texas. I had someone contact me asking me how close I was to the Swatch store near the Dallas area, and if I was going to buy one of these, and if so, if I would be willing to pick them one up as well. I think that Omega and Swatch, probably more so Swatch in this case, really sort of botched the execution on this, as we've seen online. There have been a ton of these watches being flipped. In fact, I checked eBay before I started recording this, and there were still a number of these MoonSwatches available at multifold above retail price, which could in no way be the intent on a non-limited plastic quartz watch. That was not the goal of Swatch, and I think they've tried to get messaging out there to make clear more of these are coming. It was just how they allocated to the various stores from the get-go, and they definitely underestimated the demand. Now, speaking of that demand, I want to go ahead and discuss a little bit about, do I think this is good or bad for Swatch, and do I think it's good or bad for Omega? And setting aside the troubles with the launch and the flippers, which I think will be alleviated as more watches get out into the market. We've seen similar things, though not to this volume, I would say. With instances like when Tudor drops new watches, there's often a shortage of those watches for a brief period of time, and then production catches up and the demand actually gets below MSRP for used units where that Rolex wants the Tudor brand to operate. I think overall, this was good for both companies. I think Swatch gains the most here because ever since the Apple Watch came out, my understanding is that Swatch sales have really suffered. There is just not as much demand for those low dollar watches anymore because you can get essentially an almost fully functional computer on your wrist for about the same price as a Swatch goes for. Luxury watches, because of the romanticism of the mechanical nature of them, because of the status symbol they project, because of their collectability, because of whatever. They don't have that same problem. They have a little bit of that problem in that there are some people, plenty of people I know who will say, well, why would I get a traditional watch at all? I can just have an Apple Watch. But it's not the same. Swatch seems to have really been having an issue. having this, basically a starter Speedmaster, offers something to the market that is really attractive. People who don't want to or cannot afford a Speedmaster or are curious about how one might wear for them may turn to this as an option. I would be a good case in point. I am not particularly interested in how the Moonwatch looks. Like aesthetically, it doesn't really speak to me, but something more creative in the color scheme, like some of these are, look interesting to me, but I still wouldn't pay, say, $4,000 for it. A MoonSwatch would allow me to invest a very limited amount of money and say, hey, okay, did I like it or did I not? And if I don't and I choose to get rid of it, it's not a big deal. Even if I take a loss on it, it's not a big deal because the initial investment wasn't all that much money to begin with. And for Omega, I think the plus side is some of these people who buy these MoonSwatches are going to want the quote-unquote real thing. They're going to wear this and they're going to be like, wow, I love the dimensions, I love the proportions, but I wish it was steel, I wish it was heavy, I wish it was mechanical, and they'll save their pennies and buy themselves a Speedmaster Professional at some point. So QC issues and launch aside, I think this is pretty interesting. I think this is a good move. And I am going to expect, based off of the demand we have seen thus far, that we will see some more cross collaborations between Swatch and Omega and maybe some of the other Swatch Group brand companies as things move forward. Now, if I were to pick my top 3 of these Moonswatches, my number 1 would be the Mission to Pluto. I really like that version of the red, the burgundy red, along with that gray color of the case. I'd say my number 2 would be the Mission to the Sun. That gold yellow sort of look to it. It's very, very different and it stands out quite a bit. And I think, hey, if you're going with a Swatch, it might as well have some standout. And I'd say my number 3 is the Mission on Earth. The mix of the blue and the green together. It kind of reminds me of that pistachio Breitling chronograph that exists, except obviously much more affordable. And the use of the pistachio in this case is on the case rather than the dial. But anyway, those are my thoughts. If you have any that you'd like to share, please comment below. And if you enjoyed the video, do give it a like. It does help my channel out. And if you want to be notified when I have new videos, just click the subscribe button. Everybody, have a great day.